Hello health champions! I'm sure you know that things like diabetes, obesity, heart disease are rampant. But with all the conflicting information about food, how do you even know what to eat? Today I want to cover the top 10 worst foods that are most often recommended by doctors as part of a supposedly healthy diet. And I will show you why they may not be so great for you after all. Coming right up. Hey, I'm Dr. Ekberg. I'm a holistic doctor and a former Olympic decathlete. And if you want to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. When we talk about healthy food, we have to first understand what are we trying to accomplish and what are we trying to avoid. So about 95% of all the disease that people die from is related to something called metabolic syndrome or syndrome X. And this is like an umbrella for all the things that happen when people have type 2 diabetes and heart disease and hypertension and cancer. And obesity is a huge association. It's not the cause, but it's often listed alongside these because there's a strong association with them. And therefore, good or bad foods are going to depend on how the foods are affecting these variables, like insulin and insulin resistance, if it has fructose, because fructose is a carbohydrate, it's a sugar that can only be processed by the liver. And it is about as bad as alcohol. Alcoholics get fatty liver from drinking alcohol. Well, if you get non-alcoholic fatty liver, it's because of fructose. So we have 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds in the thousands who are getting type 2 diabetes and fatty liver, and they haven't had a drop of alcohol, but they had plenty of sugar and plenty of high fructose corn syrup. So fructose is a key to understanding this. We will also relate it to glycemic index, and this is how quickly your blood glucose rises after you eat a certain food. So if you eat a refined food with lots of sugar, your blood glucose is going to rise faster, produce more insulin, and this sets you up for insulin resistance, but also for blood sugar swings and inconsistent energy levels. And we also want to understand how the food affects inflammation and if this is a food that people are commonly allergic or sensitive or intolerant to, because if there's a reaction in the body to the food, that's going to increase the inflammation as well. I'll cover 10 food items in no particular order, and the first one is whole grain bread or wheat bread. And like I said, we'll talk about insulin, glycemic index, fructose, inflammation, and allergies. And also we'll touch on fiber because that is a good thing, and these foods may have some of that, so let's see if it's actually one of the better sources. So insulin first, whole grain bread or white bread or any sort of bread, it really doesn't matter, have a high insulin response because they have a very high glycemic index. And the standard scale for glycemic index is that high is anything above 70 and low is anything below 55. But this is in a world where people eat 300 grams of carbohydrate and they stuff themselves with sugar and soda all day long. So if we want to be healthy, or if we want to reverse insulin resistance, we want to look for glycemic index numbers in the single digits or maybe up to 20 or 30. And there are plenty of foods in that range to choose from. So 74 is astronomical. That is a very high glycemic index. Fructose, there's 2.5% fructose in wheat bread. And even though we don't think of that as a high fructose food, I mean, after all, sugar has 50% fructose, but if you think about bread as something good and recommended that you're going to eat all the time, then that 2.5% fructose adds up pretty quickly. As far as inflammation, bread and wheat and gluten grains are some of the worst. They create a very high inflammatory response, and there's also a very high tendency to be sensitive to it. Even people who don't have celiacs or who don't know that they're sensitive or intolerant, the majority of people would do better to avoid bread for the reason of inflammation and intolerance. What about fiber? Well, it does have some fiber. It's about 4% of the bread is fiber. So if you have a slice of about 25 grams or so, then you get 1 gram of fiber in that bread. That's not a whole lot. We're supposed to get 30, 40, 50 grams of fiber or more. So the sources that you want to look for are things like avocado. One avocado has 10 grams of fiber. And if you start eating salads and non-starchy vegetables, they don't have much of anything in them, but what they do have is actually fiber. Next item is cereal. That's what most people have been eating for breakfast for a very, very long time, and they mix it up with some skim milk, which is not a great idea. We'll get to that. Insulin and glycemic index is about the same as bread. It's sky high. And in this case, we're talking about a slightly sweetened cereal, Honey Nut Cheerios. 16% of the total weight of this product is fructose. And even though the inflammation and allergy level is not as high as a gluten grain, it's still quite significant. There's a lot of people who are sensitive to oats, and you will also have most oats being processed on equipment with gluten grains. So unless it's certified gluten-free, then oats are typically going to have gluten in them. What about fiber? Well, it's often promoted as the strongest argument for eating the bread and the cereal and the grain. And if you read the fine print down there, they'll talk about how it's also beneficial because of the fiber. And it does have 7 grams of fiber, but that comes up to 1 gram of fiber in a serving of cereal. So you're much better off eating things like avocado and vegetables and seeds. They are actually very, very high in fiber. Next item on the list is corn, and most people believe that is a vegetable, but in fact it is a grain. And even though it's not as bad in some aspects as wheat, it still has a medium to high insulin response. It has a 52 for glycemic index, and on a standard scale that's considered low. On my scale that is high because it's too high to allow you to reverse a condition of insulin resistance. When we look at fructose, it's quite low. Inflammation, not so bad. But allergies, it's one of the most common allergies to have, corn allergies, corn insensitivities. And it is a GMO grain. Virtually all the corn grown is GMO. And it does have some fiber, but again, it's not a tremendous contribution. You're better off with other things. Here's one I get a lot of questions about. Oatmeal, how can that be bad? Well, it's not the worst thing out there, but if you eat it, you want to make sure it's steel-cut oats. Insulin response is medium to high. The glycemic index is 52 to 82, and that's the difference with steel-cut oats would end up somewhere in the lower end, right around 52, whereas 82 is if you have instant oats, if they steamroll them, if they fluff them up, if they make them very, very easy to cook, then they're also very fast to digest, and they're going to raise your blood sugar very quickly. It has virtually no fructose. It's not too bad on inflammation and allergies, and it does have some fiber, about 10%. So in a serving of oatmeal, you would get 4 grams of fiber. But if you're going to do this, remember, do the steel-cut oats and be very generous with the butter because that's going to slow down the insulin response. I receive a lot of comments from people who say that you made a lot of sense until you started bashing fruit. Well, here's what we have to understand about fruit. We've been told for so long to eat more fruits and vegetables, eat more fruits and vegetables. It's like a mantra, but what they're really saying is eat more vegetables. Fruit has changed a lot. Our ancestors had fruit seasonally. They had locally grown fruit. And the fruit they had nothing in common with the sweet, juicy, improved fruit that we have today. Their fruit had nowhere near the amount of sugar that we do, and we have access to it 365 days a year. So the insulin response is medium to high. The glycemic index is going to vary greatly, 20 to 60. Fructose, 4 to 8%. The dried fruit is much, much higher. So a lot of people say, oh, I was baking, but it didn't have any sugar because I only used dates and raisins. Well, they are 75% sugar, which means they're going to have about 35% pure fructose, okay? It is natural, it has a little bit of benefit, but it's still all just sugar. So you can't do that. Are there allergies? Not too terribly much, but there are still a lot of people who are sensitive to things like citrus or pineapple or strawberries, so watch out for that. Does it have some fiber? Yeah, it's not insignificant, but again, you can't really eat. You don't want to eat enough fruit to get your supply of fiber that way. So they're not terrible. They're juicy, they're full of vitamins and minerals, they're made by Mother Nature, but you're not supposed to have them 365 days a year. So think of it as a treat, eat it like candy once in a while, and then it's fine. Now, some people may ask, well, if they recommend these foods and they're that terrible, wouldn't they notice if nobody got better? Well, here's what we have to keep in mind, that it depends on where you start. That if you have a horrendous diet of just soda and donuts and M&Ms, then anything that you change is an improvement, all right? So if you go from horrendous to bad and now instead you have orange juice and toast, now you're better off, all right? It's still far from good, but you're better off. And then if you go from bad to decent and you change your toast for steel-cut oats, now you're on your way. You're still not eating anything great, but at least it's not horrendous. So think of it as if you have a lifespan someplace of 50 years, and then you change some things and you get it to 60 years, then that's an improvement. Does that mean that you're done? Does that mean that you're eating all great foods? No, of course not, all right? But you're better off than you were. So everything is relative. Now, if you go one more step and you go from decent to great, and you eat things like omelets and avocado and nuts and seeds and salmon salads and grass-fed beef and all these natural, wonderful things that the planet produces, now you're moving from okay to great. So most of the things I'm covering in this video is bad and decent, all right? They have figured out what is really horrendous. They don't recommend those anymore. But in moving from there, they haven't quite made it all the way. And that's what we're talking about. How to optimize it, how to have the best health, how to reverse health conditions and have the best quality of life. Next on the list is soy. And it was popularized when they figured out that Japanese and Asian people ate a lot of soy and they had less heart disease. Then they figured, hey, that must be a good thing. They forgot to check out how much sugar they ate. But it's low on insulin, low on glycemic index, virtually no fructose. So what's wrong with it then? Well, all the cultures that use soy, they don't eat the soy the way it is. They process it, they ferment it, they have bacteria, they have cultures break it down so that we can digest it easier, because it's very difficult to digest, and therefore it has a very high inflammatory response, and the allergies are very, very common. The 4 most common allergies I see are wheat, dairy, corn, and soy. And then to top it off, they have also turned it into a GMO grain along with corn. So now what they feed our animals, when they do grain-fed beef, it's basically corn and soy that they're feeding them. We've all seen the commercials for milk, so that's deeply ingrained in our culture, is that dairy is healthy and that it's a good source of calcium. Well, it is not either of those two. Now, when you take away the fat in the dairy, you're removing the best part. So the insulin response becomes much higher because you're leaving all the sugar and the protein. And when the protein isn't very well absorbed and utilized, then that turns into sugar for the most part. So it has a medium insulin response. The glycemic index in skim milk is 46, whereas butter is virtually 0 and cream is much, much lower than that. But when you add in something that's very commonly used with the milk, such as cornflakes, now the combination brings that glycemic index to 93. So you might as well be just sipping on hummingbird juice or something. Inflammation is high and allergies are high because once we process it, once we pasteurize and homogenize and remove all the fat, we change the food, right? Raw cow's milk is not a bad thing for most people. Mother's milk is the perfect food in nature, but when we mess with it, it's not the same thing anymore. And now it becomes very difficult for the body to handle it. And here is one of the biggest travesties of our time, in my opinion. We have a perfectly good food called the whole egg, and then we take the yolk and the white apart and we throw away the good part and we eat the thing that doesn't really do much for us, which is the egg white. So it is usually the egg white that people are sensitive to. It's much more common for people to be intolerant to the egg white than the yolk. The next thing is utilization. How much of that protein are we actually using? Meaning the protein can be used for one of two things. It can be used to build tissue, become building blocks, or we can turn the protein into sugar and use it for energy. Well, if we eat the whole egg, we're going to use 48%, which, by the way, is the highest percentage of any food, so that's pretty good. But when we throw away the yolk, we're throwing away some essential amino acids that take that percentage down to 17%. So when we're eating the egg whites, we think we're getting all that great protein, that lean protein. Well, we're hardly using any of it. We're turning 5/6 into sugar and we're using it for fuel. So eggs can be a fantastic food, but if you eat them, find a good quality one. I only eat pastured eggs, and make sure you eat the whole thing. And here's another example of how terribly backwards we've been getting our information. They've told us that fat is bad and saturated fat is bad, when in fact fat is good and saturated fat is good if it comes from a good source. But then they told us that the fat you do eat should come from vegetable oils, and that is one of the worst fats that we can eat because they say it's vegetable, but it's actually made from soy, corn, and canola, which is a legume, a grain, and a seed. And these are pro-inflammatory. They promote inflammation. They drive these disease processes that they're trying to avoid because omega-6s are driving that cascade in the body. They are empty calories because they're so harshly processed, and they have some tendency to allergies. Not so much because they've stripped them of almost everything, but if you're really sensitive to corn or soy, then that could still be a problem. And to top it off, all of these grains are predominantly GMO these days. And then we get to margarine, and margarine has all of the same problems as these so-called vegetable oils because they're made from the same stuff, the soy, the corn, and the canola. So we have those same issues. And they have partially solved the biggest issue, which is trans fats, that when they take the oil and they turn it into this solid spackle stuff, then they harden it through a process called hydrogenation. And they have forced a labeling of trans fats, but it's only how many grams per serving. So they can say 0 grams of trans fat, and it has 0.49 grams per teaspoon. So you can have 10% of trans fats and still call it trans fat free. So they've come a long way in getting rid of it, but understand that if they harden, if they take an oil and they turn it solid, they have hydrogenated it. And they might do it a little better than they used to, but it's not a product that I would use. So stick with real butter, or if you're super sensitive to dairy, then you can use ghee. I hate to tell you this, but red wine is not a health food. It seems to make it onto every list of healthy things to do these days, and there are some benefits, but let's take a look. The first thing it has that we want to know about is alcohol. And together with fructose, alcohol is the worst thing for the liver. It's a huge burden for the liver. It causes alcoholic fatty liver disease. And if you're trying to reverse fatty liver, you want to keep alcohol to a minimum, whether it's wine or anything else. Red wine does have something called resveratrol, and this has been linked to various different health benefits, and it's a good thing, but it's very, very small amounts, and you really couldn't drink enough wine without killing yourself to get any substantial amount of resveratrol. So if you're trying to get resveratrol, just go get a supplement that has it in it. And perhaps the greatest benefit of red wine, though, is that it is relaxing. When we relax, we reduce the stress. We cut down on stress hormones and cortisol. We allow more beneficial processes and healing in the body when we're relaxing. But if you just practice a little bit, you could do a same relaxation with going for a walk, breathing some fresh air, listening to some music, or doing a meditation, or having a cup of tea. It's not that you should never drink. If you really enjoy having a glass of wine, then I think that you should have a glass of wine now and then. Just don't think of it as a health food. If you enjoyed this video and you want to learn more about health, you really need to check out that one next. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.